Good morning, David. Certainly pleased to hear a lot of conversation about collaboration. I had an opportunity to take a look at your slide presentation on your website, on your blog, and in that you talked about involving the business community and economic revitalization and a library as a place for incubation. I think in communities around British Columbia, small rural communities, we're experiencing, I think in Powell River specifically, our biggest export has been our children over the last 30 years. And so what we want to do is bring families back to our communities. And a library might be a place where using an innovative approach, we could have an incubation center for youth, young families who are using the internet as their business center. And the library can be a place that can advocate a community as a place to invest as a family. Can you talk about that?
I think it's a wonderful and important point. I'll give one relatively simple example and one, I think, structural example. The simple example is in Eureka, Illinois, which is very, very rural Illinois, coal country practically. They had a woman who came up to the library said, there's no place to eat lunch in this city, in this small town. And so the library said, well, and the woman came in and said, and I'm a professional chef. And so what the library said is, you can have that corner of our yard. And so set up a place that every Wednesday she'd serve lunch, and that turned to Wednesday and Tuesdays and Thursdays, and eventually started her catering business. And my short example of that is that a library can be more than just, we have resources available to teach you to start a business. It can actually talk about starting business. When the state was reducing its cost by reducing footprint and workload, what happened is they closed the sort of entrepreneurial business development office. And so what the librarian said is, why not co-locate that in the library itself? She actually picked up rent money, but it allowed anyone coming to the library to automatically get access to that kind of expertise and startup. They then created a network with local community colleges so that when people, and community services, so that when people who were unemployed came in and began saying, I don't know what to do, the library had this whole setup to say, here's some counselors coming from the county. We can set you up automatically with our community colleges for reskilling. We can set you up with local industry that had retraining programs. But the one that really struck me was the state of Vermont. The state of Vermont took a broadband stimulus initiative. That is, the federal government gave out lots of money to bring broadband internet into rural America, and Vermont won it. And what Vermont decided to do was that their drop-off points for these really high bandwidth connections were public libraries. And they said it's not because we think everyone's going to walk into the public library. It's because that's then going to become the hub that local businesses can connect to, that local homes can connect to, and it's a neutral space, non-political space, and it's a place that when people get that connection, they want to figure out what to do with it, they're going to have examples and content. In the city of Chattanooga, Tennessee, they run a large fiber broadband connection around the city. The agency that connected them said, we don't know what content to put on it. They went to the local library and said, here, you're our broadcaster. And they work with local community groups to create content, to create information, to create events that they could then share around this broadband stimulus to give ideas so that local industry and business could then talk about how to use that as well. So I think that the public library working as an economic stimulator is a vital role, particularly if the community sees economic stimulus as its #1 priority.
Perhaps I'll just, listening to your presentation reminded me of a statement that one of our brightest minds, Rex Murphy, said to Local Government Association a few years back that, in his opinion, we are the keepers of the fabric of society. And I think that title is more fitting to libraries than local governments because, well, I think you have a better brand than we do, and certainly more or unbiased. And so I just leave it at that.
I think that's absolutely true, and to realize that culture is this is a lesson I had to learn. That culture is what's living, not simply what's dead. That as we are building the culture by what we remember and what we choose to forget, and that libraries need to make sure that that is a conscious and active role, and not simply those things that didn't get destroyed by the fire.
Good morning, David. Thank you very much. Your presentation was fascinating. This morning I heard something that I thought I'd never hear in my entire life, and it was the words radical and library in the same sentence. It's a fascinating notion. And so my question is this: within our current library model, and I should say, I'll preface this with the fact that I'm not a librarian. I have no library connection other than the fact that I've been a lifetime library user. I can't even remember when I didn't have a library card. And so my question is this: within the current model of libraries, how do you imagine that we get to this radical place, this radical shift for libraries, if we have the same structure in place? Do you have any commentary on how we might move that?
Yeah, first of all, radical is a very interesting word, because if you look it up, it has three distinct and pretty different meanings. One is radical, on the edge, crazy. One is actually root or at the origin. So when you have a radical mastectomy, it's not that the doctor's doing something crazy. It means they're taking the whole organ. And it also means actually coming from tradition. And so what radical to me, and I love that sort of three combination, because that's what librarianship is to me. Something that is at its root and its origin and its basis, but is constantly pushing us forward. Intellectual property, our views on intellectual property, our views on open access to information, our views on copyright, our views on all of these things have been shaped by librarians advocating over time, not simply sitting back and waiting to see what was decided. So there's a pretty strong history. In fact, Joyce Latham, who's at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, did her dissertation where she looked at the labor movement in the Chicago libraries in the 30s, and her conclusion was that it was in fact the librarians that radicalized the Teamsters, not the other way around. So it's been an interesting time. I think the question of structure is an important one. I think that one thing that librarians can fall into is sort of Daedalus's maze, which is let's face it, libraries have been extraordinarily successful over millennia by applying hierarchical organization schemes to materials. Unfortunately, at some point we thought it was a good idea to do that to ourselves. So my guess is, while there is a British Columbia Library Association, there probably is a division for academics, public schools. There's probably one under academics for reference and public services, and one for cataloging. There's probably one under cataloging for those who agree with Michael Gorman and don't. I mean, we subdivide everything until we, can't categorize anything anymore. It's going to require that librarians realize that our face to the public needs to look like the public, and our face to each other needs to be where we organize things around good ideas and not simply seniority.
David, throughout your presentation, I thought there was so many times that we could have substituted the word school for library in looking at the transformations that we're trying to do in the K-12 sector. We're really fortunate, I think, in British Columbia that we have teacher librarians that are leading a lot of those learning changes in our schools. And what I'm curious about is how you see that influence that teacher librarians can play in K-12 to more largely influence that transformation that we want to happen beyond the library, but with learning in schools in general.
Okay, just because you opened up the obvious comment for the audience, I have to say it. The first is we need more of them. We need them in the schools, not just traveling amongst them, which I know is a case and so. But we have to earn it, folks. I mean, the idea that there are too many school librarians who view themselves as the keeper of the collection and the reader of story times, when in fact they need to be collaborating with teachers and administrators more than the time they spend in the classroom, as it were, working on a multidisciplinary intercurriculum project. Because what we've learned about learning is that it is collaborative. And unfortunately, the same structures that we talked about with libraries, teachers are facing this as well. We did a study, now it's a little bit out of date, but I wouldn't find it radically different. We did a study where we looked at teachers' ability to sort of search for information, hop on the internet and find something. We found between the time teachers were in the classroom, had their lunch, were able to pee, call back their parents. They had about 11 minutes a day to actually search for information, right? That's not enough. But if they can be working with librarians who know what they're looking for, finding the information, integrating, that's important. Lane Wilkinson wrote a very interesting blog piece this morning in which he said, I am not a teacher. And it's a really interesting question about our librarians teachers. And it's one I go back and forth with. And I think the answer is no. Because I think teachers have a unique and powerful knowledge of pedagogy. I think they understand classroom management in a way that librarians won't. But I think they make excellent teachers. That mission I have, the mission of librarians is to improve society through facilitating knowledge creation in their communities. I think that's a teacher's mission too. I think the way we facilitate is different, but I think that we're all on the same board. I think publishers have that mission. I think that some businessmen would see that as their mission. I think that's a good thing. I think finding ourselves in common mission helps. And as for what librarians can do, school librarians can spend a hell of a lot less time in the school library and a lot more time in the classrooms. They can be spending a lot more time online preparing resources so that when students are at home, they have as much academic support as when students are in the classroom.